I'm here to talk about IDOR attacks today, and this is a presentation that's probably going to be fun if you're maybe new to web application assessments, or if you've been doing web application assessments for a while and just want some good laughs at some vulnerabilities I'm going to be talking about here. But I want to start, does anybody remember seeing this illustration before? This is a classic Vinny Liu illustration from like 30 years ago. I talked to Vinny about it, many years after he had made this, and he said to me, I wish I had spent more time on that if I knew that was going to get so much play. But this is a presentation that Vinny did about real-world pen testing. And the thing I always found so interesting about this is that it's at the vertice of my sense of self-worth is directly proportional to the number of vulnerabilities I'm finding in a pen test. And then as you go through the course of your week, you suck, you really suck, I'm not good enough, I can't do this. And then, wait a minute. And then hold on, this is interesting. And then you kind of go, and then at the end of the week, your self-worth goes down when you have to do all the reporting. So this is something that Vinny put together many years ago, and it really caught me, and I never forgot it. And I always love this illustration. And I feel like my life is sort of like that, but a little bit different. And so, I teach for the SANS Institute. I wrote the Sec 504 class there. I hack for CounterHack, where we do lots of pen tests for lots of different customers. And my work schedule looks a lot like this. We have a pen test. At the end of the pen test, we have reporting. And then after the reporting, we do our customer closeout, the presentation. We talk about our findings. We're helping them understand. And then we finish the project. And then we do it again. And then you have another pen test and reporting and a closeout. And then you do that again. And you just kind of repeat that process over and over and over again. I was talking this morning, I feel like my best vulnerability discoveries don't happen during pen tests. They happen 3 months later when I'm doing the dishes and my hands are sudsy and I'm just kind of like, wait a minute. And then I got to run upstairs with soapy hands because you got to do that thing right now, right? But this is a tough thing to maintain. And I've worked for a couple of consulting companies over the years, and it's tough to continue doing this day in and day out and, trying to find the time for all the other things that you're supposed to do as well. Sales, helping the salespeople, scoping future work, talking about how much time you'd actually need to do a good job on a pen test, and, dealing with problems as you're going through the kind of things that come up in the company or work or other people's activities or customers not ready with their assets to be tested, or, things like just trying to read articles, trying to keep up on Medium and things like that. Or, if you have some grace, you're mentoring other people, trying to bring up people, helping them understand the kind of work that we're doing and why it's exciting and why it's fun, listening to risky.biz, learning about new tools, worrying about AI and what's going on with DeepSeek and, the stock price of NVIDIA. No, I'm not worried about that. What are TAs, threat actors doing? What are they up to? And I'm trying to keep on top of that. Cloud things, whatever, and geopolitics, what's the difference between the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China? And just trying to keep on top of all these things, hating CVSS, which is a normal thing for me on a regular basis. Zig is a thing now. I didn't know about that. DeepSeek, whatever's going on there. And then that's the amount of time that I feel like I have to do something novel, to do something interesting, to be able to really be creative. And what I realized is that, I don't know when, but I forgot to have fun. And I just realized one day that I've been doing this pen testing for a long time now, and it just wasn't fun anymore. And it was just a machine, and it was just rote, and I was trying to keep up all the time, and I'm always frustrated, and it just wasn't fun anymore. And I don't want that. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for any of you. And so I thought, well, maybe it's time to take a step back and let's try to have some fun. That's how I came up with the idea for this presentation. I'm hoping this becomes a whole series, Hackventures with Josh, for, open and redirect vulnerabilities, which is always a fun time, and trying to explain that to customers and why it's a big deal. But for this presentation, I want to talk about IDOR vulnerabilities. Do you remember last year in May, Dell had a pretty significant IDOR vulnerability where a threat actor ended up registering an account as a Dell partner, which requires absolutely nothing, apparently, and then use that access to be able to scrape millions of different Dell customer records by looking up warranty support information on the Dell partner website. Apparently Dell wasn't really watching that server so closely because he says he scraped about 50 million Dell customer records before offering it for sale and making it available. And Menelik, this threat actor that posted this information for sale online, said that the warranty identifier information was 7 characters, digits and consonants, no vowels. That's kind of a weird combo for a developer to choose, but whatever. And then just scraped all that information and saved all that stuff. This got surprisingly little fanfare, but I thought it was really interesting because as a pen tester, and just as a normal user browsing the internet, I see IDOR vulnerabilities all the time. Now, IDOR is a type of vulnerability we classify as a broken object level authorization. Basically, this is an endpoint that you can access that will do a thing or get you data that is not properly secure, that is not protected. And IDOR vulnerabilities are typically associated with a predictable pattern. Now, this is something that's happened to lots of significant companies. Baidu happened in Google, Google Docs, Google Sheets recently, the Department of Defense, Facebook, Instagram, Tesla recently, Dell, of course, and many more. In 2016, Parler was like an alt-right website that a lot of people were publishing information on. During the Capitol building insurrection, a lot of people were like live streaming to the Parler website, uploading videos, and a lot of that information became evidence. The Parler people were actually going out of business while that was all going on, but the day after the Capitol building insurrection, a researcher realized that the Parler website had an IDOR vulnerability where all the images, all the videos, all the content people were uploading were just sequentially numbered. So by going to the website parler/v1/photo?ID equals and then a number, this researcher just started downloading every single image from that website. That was eventually supplied to the FBI and was used as evidence to prosecute a lot of people that stormed the Capitol building that day. This is actually a very common vulnerability. It doesn't have to be numeric patterns, although it can be like in this first example here, but it can also be just static file names. It could be dates that are just in like future quarterly reports or predicting things like that. It could be strings like profile pictures, maybe random strings, but not long enough and without enough randomness or not enough entropy long enough to not be predictable, and lots of other examples as well. Sometimes we see UUIDs that can be involved in an IDOR vulnerability. That's harder to guess, harder to exploit, but it's not outside the realm of possibility, especially if the site discloses the UUIDs in some other endpoint on the website. These IDOR vulnerabilities are pretty common, and we can see them in lots of different ways. And this is not a super technical vulnerability. It's not, something that we need to understand, 8,000 degrees of foundational elements to be able to do this. This is something that everybody can do. You're looking at websites, you're looking at URLs, you're looking at the browser inspector. You just keep an eye out for those patterns and look for things that might disclose something sensitive. Now, I want to talk about a couple of different examples here, and I want to show you an example of this in practice here to have a demonstration. This is a website that I use in my sales class. It's just something I kind of whipped up to demonstrate this IDOR vulnerability. But I made this website for this fictitious company that we use called Falsimentis, and it has a lookup for customer number. So very similar to the Dell vulnerability. I kind of modeled it after what I could find out about the Dell vulnerability. And if you see a website like this and okay, I'm going to look up a customer number here, 1111111, and we're going to see what happens. Invalid warranty, not found. Okay, so we don't know what's going on here. We don't know what a valid customer number is. And so far, we haven't found anything sensitive about this site. A lot of time when we're exploiting IDOR vulnerabilities, we have to do some reconnaissance analysis to find out, well, what is a valid number? How can we make the system return something meaningful, and then from there build on that to try to identify other vulnerabilities or other sensitive things on the website. Now, on this website, there's actually a tech article, how to find your customer number. And then if you read this kind of tech article, they actually give us an example here, 7378222. You can find your customer number if you're one of these customers of Falsimentis at the end of every one of our support emails. Fantastic. So now that I know that, I can go back here and I can start with some valid information. If I go back and enter that customer number and do a search, now I'm not just getting warranty not found, but I'm getting an expired message. But more importantly, I'm seeing some PII. Now, I didn't get access to the Dell vulnerability before they patched it. I'm not sure what the details are, but I think it's something very similar to this example here, where you enter a valid customer number and it returns some detailed information, including some PII, in this case, my friend Larry, email address and his mailing address information. Well, now that we know this URL, we could use that with a command line tool to be able to enumerate, well, what happens when I put other numbers in here? Now, what we're going to have to do with the command line is to be able to enumerate that pattern. We know that pattern is 7 digits. We know it's all numeric. So what we want to do is generate a pattern. And from the Linux or the Mac command line, we could use the utility SEQ. With SEQ, we can have a starting number and an ending number, and it will just generate that pattern of numbers. Now, this gets a little tricky, my BSD friends that are also using Mac systems, because if we use this utility, and you start using very large numbers, like let's say 0 to 9999999, then the BSD sequence utility will start actually generating exponential values, which is really not what I want here. So I want literal numbers, not exponential values. That has bitten me more than once. So I want to share that just as a little, hey, just be aware this utility is a little bit different on Mac systems. And so I actually use the GSEQ utility, which is GNU SEQ. Okay, you can install that with Brew or something like that. The other thing we have to keep in mind is that if we look at the beginning of these numbers here, let's see, head-12, we can see that the numbers that are short have only a single decimal or only a single digit there, but we might want padded or leading zeros in the beginning for all those numbers. Is the customer number 1 or is the customer number 0000001? With the SEQ utility, we can specify that with -W. I always remember that as the width argument, and now we get all those numbers with the same width. So we want to generate this pattern of information, but we're not just going to send it to our pipeline here. What we're going to do is we're going to use the utility FUF. FUF stands for Fuzz Faster, you fools, and it is a utility that allows you to use any URL, replace any part of that URL with the word fuzz, and then it will take the input you supply and try to retrieve all those different values for all those different options. So with FUF, we can specify, hey, read my list information, all of those numbers from standard input. -W could be a file, but here we're redirecting from standard input, so it's -W-. And then the URL that we want to use, which I'm going to copy from my browser here. Now, we don't want to use this exact URL. What we want to do is replace that valid number with the keyword fuzz. And now what FUF will do is make that request to this URL endpoint and show me the summary results of that request for each one of the numbers that I'm supplying. This is going to generate a fair amount of activity because I'm giving it something like a billion different requests to make here. Okay. Now, when we start this, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so we can see a little better. We start to get a bunch of response values here that are not really quite what we want. If we look at these responses, the server keeps returning a 200 message. So it's saying, yeah, I got something here. I'm getting a valid response, but the size is always the same. And if we went to any one of these numbers, say this request 111475, here. We're getting a lot of consistency in responses because a lot of these values aren't found. So a lot of the requests are just returning empty set, not really useful information for us. So what we often have to do with FUF is add some filtering. Notice how each one of these responses that has no valid data comes back with a number of lines of 91. That's because the HTML has 91 lines of response when there's no additional content. But we know from our one valid example that we should see more lines when it has valid content. So what we can do here is we can add a filter by the number of lines to say, don't show me any lines where the number of lines is exactly 91, but show me everything else. Now, this is going to show us less data on the output, but that's because every one of these responses has a different number of lines than the filtered response we're supposed to see. Now, here we're getting all that information and all these numbers are valid. What I will often do is add -o, specify a temporary directory to save all those results to with fuff. And now for each one of those valid responses that's not filtered, it's going to save that into that temporary directory and create a bunch of files there for me to access all that data. Okay. Now, all of these response values are coming back here, but we could take any of these response values and for each of these values, we can see that we're able to harvest different customer support information. Now, I don't have detailed information about that Dell IDOR vulnerability, but I think it's very similar to this example here. And this is typically the process that we go through when we're exploiting this. This is a pretty straightforward attack. We're looking at a URL, we're trying to figure where there are patterns, we're generating other mutations of that pattern, here using SEQ, or you could use a Python script or whatever is useful to you, and then we're trying to retrieve all that data to see if there's anything actually useful there for us. Questions on that so far? Everybody's doing okay? All right. So, knowing that this is an IDOR vulnerability, let's have some fun. Okay. So, I live in Rhode Island, small state, and Massachusetts is very near us, and in Seekonk, Massachusetts, which is very near us, there's a restaurant that my family and I go to called Newport Creamery. Newport Creamery is like a little ice cream place, but they have food. It's not fancy. It is just like a quick place to get a sandwich or to get some egg dish in the morning or something like that. They've got milkshakes. If you're from New England and you know Friendly's, Newport Creamery is kind of very similar to that kind of a style of restaurant. And it's a place that my wife and I go on the weekends to be able to get breakfast in the morning before doing errands or things like that. And when we go to Newport Creamery, they would always give us a check that looks like this. What's interesting about this check? Anybody have any ideas? You can just yell them out. I'll repeat them so people can hear it online as well. There's a check number at the top, right? The check number here is 15, so that's kind of interesting. What else? There's a QR code. I see some of you taking your phones out. Feel free, okay? You know, if you want to do that, that's all right, okay? There's a QR code here. I love this. I love anything that minimizes the necessity to me to be in contact with other human beings, okay? So for me, when they give me this, I'm like, this is the end of any interaction we have to have. I can take care of it from here, right? No, like, here's my card. Are you taking it away? I don't know. It's done here, right? Apple Pay, we're all set, okay? So when you scan that URL and you open it up in your phone, it actually opens up to a page that looks like this. It shows you your bill, the total. You can do tipping from here. You can scroll up and pay. And when you pay, you get a little green screen, which is just static. I have a screenshot of it. I don't really know if that's any kind of a verification for I paid my bill, but that's the whole process, okay? You scan, you pay online, and then you kind of walk out, and there's no need for any other interaction here. But the URL here is kind of interesting. If you were to scan that URL, that QR code, you would see the URL pay.skytab.com/BADBE1/10/10-0-12052024. What's interesting about that URL? There's a date in there, and we know the date matches the date on the check number. That's interesting. What else? Check number 10. We see check number 10 is in the URL, and it's in the receipt as well. Awesome. Okay, what else is interesting about that URL? Yeah, what's bad B1? I don't know. Okay, I don't know. We can figure that out, right? So one time I, took the check number and then I brought it home and I put it in my browser and I looked at it in the browser inspector and here's the bill here and, just rendered inside of my browser. And then the browser inspector is a fantastic tool. I leave the browser inspector open like 90% of the day and just kind of glancing at things and using filtering and looking for S3 buckets and other great things that we heard about earlier today and stuff like that. But, I kept that open, but if you look carefully, when you go to render that page, it actually retrieves information from api.pay.skytab.com/APIv1 merchants, BADBE1, check number equals 15 in this particular case, okay? Classic IDOR vulnerability here, where the check number is the unique identifier that gives you that check information for that customer. BADBE1 actually happens to be the SkyTab restaurant identifier. So SkyTab is the service provider. Newport Creamery just outsources to this third-party SaaS provider, and they provide the check payment system. They've got a whole, scanner, handheld thing, or printing QR codes, and all the payment is handled through this merchant processor SkyTab platform here. Okay, fantastic. So what we can do is go back to using FUF again. So I took that URL one time, I went back to my house, I ran FUF on it. Now the check number actually closes when the check is paid. So what I found out is that you're only going to get check responses when that check is still open. So basically, you've ordered your meal, the waiter or waitress decides, you're not going to order anymore. They close the check, they put it on the table, and then you get around to paying it when you want to. But there's that window, say 5, 10, 20 minutes, whatever it is, until you pay that check, where that information is publicly available to anybody. No WAF, no filtering, anybody can get that information. So by using FUF, just like we saw with the warranty site, I was able to identify, oh look, check number 62 returned a payload size of 575 bytes, and if you go to the API endpoint, then you get a JSON blob. And that JSON blob has all the items in the order, the total amount, the waiter or waitress name, some other information about the restaurant, the table number, things like that. That's all readily available to us. Fantastic. Now, as far as IDOR vulnerabilities go, is this PII? Well, maybe not. It's not personally identifiable information. There's the waiter or waitress name, but that's hardly PII information here. So this is not as maybe high impact as the Dell vulnerability. But it's interesting that BABDE1 value is the unique restaurant code, which is 16.7 million values, because it's just hex, right? 2 to the power of 24 is 16.7 million values. Everyday location number, the location number stays the same, BADBE1, but the check number goes back down to 1 for the first customer of the day. So if you just keep asking that API server, what are your valid checks, for a bunch of check numbers, you'll keep downloading all that information. So I wrote a tool called SkyTapped. And SkyTapped actually uses an adaptive learning algorithm to be able to keep pulling that information down throughout the day. So I run every couple of minutes, and then it just scrapes that information and stores all that information in a Postgres database. It takes that JSON, it puts the JSON into Postgres, kind of when I got it, how many requests it took me to find it, and things like that. I only collected this information for one restaurant, but of course you could do it for any restaurant by brute forcing that BADBE1 value or just going to another restaurant and finding out what their individual code is. So I ran this for most of December, all of January. It's still running right now. And I'm just kind of collecting that information all the time, pulling in a database and trying to see what's interesting here. And it's interesting because you can use this to start gathering some analytics about the restaurant. So for example, I could see that there were 4,880 checks I collected in the month of February for all these people that are checking out here, okay? You could use SQL to find out, okay, what are the top sales days for this restaurant and how much sales are they doing in a given day and collecting that information here. So that was kind of fun. By the way, I did not write that query. ChatGPT wrote that query because Postgres and JSON, while it can do it, I don't recommend it, okay? So that was kind of ugly there, okay? But, I wanted to find some information like, what are the top things that people order? Like, what are the top items on the menu? Most popular items on the menu, and it's this for the month of January. Egg and home fries, senior menu. So it's discounted, right, a little bit, okay? Pancake and sausage, senior menu. All right, okay. Eggs, bacon, and sausage, or what they call the 2x3 option, okay, all right. Cheeseburger and fries, senior menu, okay? And then the awful, which is what they call their milkshake here, okay? So I go there like once a week, and apparently a lot of old people do as well. Like, I don't know what that says about me, but that's, okay, that's kind of interesting. A couple other things I found out here. The best sales day, January 18th, $3,336. I was appalled at that. I thought restaurants made a lot more money. Busiest day of the week is Saturday for this restaurant. Most expensive order, $145.28, okay? Busiest waitstaff, Samantha. I know Samantha, she's awesome, okay? Yeah, we like her a lot, okay? Most items in order, 21 items in one order, right? And I'm like, well, I have to know, right? So I looked at that order, and it was side of English muffin times 13. Like, I don't know why. It was side of coleslaw times 5, okay? Five sides of coleslaw. Waffle cone, 2 scoop, okay? A plate of curly fries and dry white toast, okay? Like, I don't know. I mean, like, that's like, it's like 5,000 calories. Like, it's good. That's a good time right there. Like, somebody, you really need to know what you like for that to be your order, okay? Like, that's somebody that's nailed that down, okay? So, you know, when you look at that in the surface and you look at that check number, you might think, I don't know how interesting this is. It's an IDOR vulnerability, but what's the big deal? But when you collect that information over time, now it becomes something different. Now, if you collect that information over time for all the restaurants in that chain, and then start using that as competitive information to find out what other people are ordering and how you're supplying your menu, now it becomes an unfair competitive differentiator against other restaurants, and that can have impact to this kind of a small organization here. The thing that I wanted to share with you is that these IDOR vulnerabilities can be fun, they can kind of be exciting, and it was just fun for me to say, this isn't my customer, like they're not paying me to do this, but it's just an API endpoint out there on the internet, and I can make requests from my AWS box to harvest this information, put it in a database, and then kind of collect information over time. That was a lot of fun for me. And it just illustrates this kind of vulnerability and the thing that we should be watching out for. Okay. Let's go to Nashville here for a second for another example. I go to Nashville like once a year or so for work, and it's a fun place to be. I go there for not fun reasons, work, but you know, it's a good time. And last time I was in Nashville was in the end of October recently, and I had worked all day and I just wanted to like eat and go to bed, and so I ordered some Indian food at a place called Midtown Foods, and then walked over to this location. I got there and it did not look like any restaurant I'd ever been to before. It looked a little sketchy. Like I was like, oh, I don't know about this place. It's kind of weird. And then when I walked in, there was no humans. There was no tables. It was just a bunch of lockers. Okay. And so like I went inside and I looked around and I went outside and I'm like looking at my phone. Is this even the right place? Like what's going on? And you know, the lockers were numbered A1 through G4, and there was a second set H1 through N4 for all these lockers here as well. And I'm like, I don't really know what's going on here. I did get a text message, so I looked at my text message and it said, oh, your order's in progress for Devi's Indian Kitchen, where I ordered food from. And then it said, oh, your order's ready. Tap this link to open your locker. Okay. And then you tap the link here, and then it opens the locker. And I'm like, am I in trouble? Like, I don't know. Like, and I just kind of took it away and I left. Okay. And I'm like walking back with my food, and I'm thinking, something's not right about this. Like, I don't know, something doesn't feel quite right about this URL here. Something's going on. So of course I went back the next day, right, and ordered there. This service is actually called cloudkitchens.com. There was order number 1, here's order number 2 here. And so you end up tapping that little URL, and then your locker magically opens, and you just kind of take whatever's inside, and then you walk out. No humans, no monitoring, like there's no person that says, like, are you supposed to be here? You just like open the link and you walk away with your food. So of course I went back a couple more times as well. I was really getting sick of Indian food by the end of this week here. And what's interesting about these URLs? Yeah, they're all 7 characters, all capitals, not all consonants. There are vowels here as well, but I initially was hopeful for that. No numbers though, and I thought that was interesting, okay? So earlier we looked at the Newport Creamery example. That was an example of an IDOR vulnerability where I'm scraping potentially sensitive information from a target site. But this is something that's a very similar vulnerability, but now we're using it to unlock these lockers, to be able to maybe purloin somebody's, butter chicken or whatever it is that they're ordering from Devi's Indian Kitchen here, okay? So I ended up taking one of these URLs and put it in my browser. I'd already gotten my food, so I got an error message. But if you look in here, it actually makes an API request to api.cloudkitchens.com/checkin MCI order PFFAEAD. Okay. Another IDOR vulnerability where really the only thing we have to do is to start guessing that 7-character code. And if you land on the right code, then you will open a locker. And it wasn't even a pull this tab, the locker just went plunk and it just opened, right? So like in my mind, I thought, well, I'm going to sit outside and just brute force all these things until all the lockers open, right? This place is called a ghost kitchen, which I had not heard of before. It's meant for like DoorDash and Uber Eats drivers, and people order, and there's no restaurant. It's just a kitchen, and then it's all takeout kind of a thing here. Somebody told me it was like headless Chrome, and it immediately went, oh yes, now I understand that completely. Like yes, I get that. It's okay, headless Chrome. I'm with you on that. Okay. So PFFAEAD is 7 characters, all uppercase. So if we do the math, that's 26 letters. That's 7 to the power 6, which is about 8 billion different options, okay? Now, how long is it going to take you to brute force 8 billion different options to open all the lockers at the location? Well, if there's 52 lockers, it's going to take you a long time, right? Depending on how many requests you can do per second. But with IDOR vulnerabilities, that's important for us to figure out, because we need to understand what the actual opportunity is for an attacker. The Dell vulnerability apparently ran for months. Dell wasn't even looking, and they didn't even know until all that information was posted for sale. We should be looking for these types of patterns. And as attackers, we should enumerate this to try to figure out what it's going to take from a time perspective. So if I say, all right, I don't want to open all the lockers, I just want to open any one locker. Like I just want to get unauthorized access to somebody's Indian butter chicken, and I'm going to just brute force all these different values. If I'm opening one locker, then we could take 8 billion divided by 52, the number of lockers that were there, and then that's about 154.5 million requests. And if I'm generously saying 10,000 requests per second, it would take me about 15,445 seconds to guess any valid locker number at that location and have the door open up for me, which is probably going to take me, with probability, a little over 2 hours, okay? 50% of the time, I don't have to brute force all the values. I can brute force about halfway, and if I'm lucky, I'll get the right locker number, okay? In about 2 hours, I could open a random locker. Now that seems a lot less interesting to me, because I'm gonna, look, one locker opened. Was it because of me, or was it just because it was a locker? I don't know, right? So that became less interesting. But CloudKitchens.com has 91 locations all over the United States, okay? To my best guess here, 91 locations here that I add up from their map here. So if we look back at that math again, and I want to start opening random lockers at random Cloud Kitchens locations, just like, I'm just chaos monkey. Like, I'm just like, just like opening doors and just like, hey, you have butter chicken, like you have butter chicken. I'm just like doing it. You could open a Cloud Kitchen locker in about every 3 minutes. Okay, about 170 seconds to brute force those values to open a location locker at any location here. Okay, now, the reason I think this is interesting is because it is a very common technique. IDOR vulnerabilities shouldn't exist anymore. Like, that shouldn't be a thing. Why is that still a thing? This should not happen. Yet, brand new cloud services, new kind of shiny retail platform mechanisms for taking payment of sale, created in the last couple of years, are introducing these vulnerabilities that most of us that have been doing this work in the industry for a long time have seen for maybe decades in our careers. This should not be happening anymore, but it does happen all the time. But we need to be creative in assessing the impact of these things. If you look at that 7-character value, then you might say, nobody's brute forcing that to open a locker for unauthorized access. But if my goal is not to access a individual locker, but just to be chaos monkey and start opening lockers in every location across the United States, well, then that's a different number. And we can assess that to really understand the risk that we're doing when we're describing these vulnerabilities to our customers, to say why this is important and why you should consider this and why this is something that you need to fix. Now, this morning, John said something, that fragile things break, right? And if you do powerlifting, you've probably heard the saying, weak things break, right? Weak things break is a very popular saying, and if you're a powerlifter. And, we need to break things so that they can get better, to get stronger. But these are real vulnerabilities in systems. I didn't disclose these to them. You guys are the first people to hear about it ever, right? So I just, I just thought it was kind of fun, I'm also a little jaded because clearly, like, you tell me that there's not one developer at either of those two places that don't know that's an IDOR vulnerability. Come on. Like, maybe I'm a little jaded about that. But the thing that I think is important about this is to understand the vulnerabilities, not to be this. Like, don't do that, okay? Do you guys know this? That is apparently a horse or an ass. Like, that's another name for it, right? So, don't be an asshole, right? Like, don't do that, okay? Like, don't be a jerk about it, like John said this morning. Like, I'm not disclosing these vulnerabilities. If you really want to see SkyTapped, I can show you the source code for that. But, like, I'm not up here to talk about, I want you to go ahead and exploit these vulnerabilities. I want you to use these against target systems. I'm up here because I want you to have fun. And I want you to look at these vulnerabilities and to think about them, whether they're IDOR vulnerabilities or any of the other things that we do. We often get kind of tied down to rules of engagement and, scoping and, what is the GRC angle in this? And those are very real things that professionally we have to deal with on a regular basis. I'm not saying break all those rules because that's important stuff that we have to do, but I think we can also give ourselves a little grace just to have a little fun too. And to look at this and to say, this is kind of interesting, and I can come up with an idea, and I can kind of experiment with it, and maybe struggle, and maybe on the outcome have learned something useful that'll make me a better analyst going forward too. So, a couple of takeaways here. IDOR vulnerabilities shouldn't exist anymore, but they do. We still see them all the time in professional penetration tests. They're still being reported for modern platforms. It's a thing that exists in lots of cases, and it's something that we should be looking for in all of our application assessments. Watch for those patterns. Use the browser inspector. Go to the network tab, add a filter, and just look for those patterns in all the URLs that you're browsing on a regular basis. Firefox is better than Chrome here, because in Firefox, you can right-click on the browser inspector and click resend, and then actually edit that URL and resend it right from there. So you don't even need to use Burp Suite. You don't need to go to a lot of extra trouble, just within your browser. And now just in the normal scope of looking at things, you've got all the tools you need right inside of Firefox to be able to experiment, to be able to look at things, and to try to understand how things are set up and where there might be vulnerabilities. Consider the impact. Looking at a single check, not a big deal. Collecting all the checks for a restaurant over a month, or all of the restaurant chains and all of their bills for months at a time, can have significant impact for the viability of that business. So consider kind of the broad perspective, not just the micro perspective. What is the macro perspective of this vulnerability, and what could an attacker do with it? Don't just get in the weeds and think about this one request demonstrates this thing. Think about it from a broader perspective as well. Use your skills for good and evil, and don't forget to have fun and just kind of enjoy what we do. Right. Thank you.
Joshua, thank you so much. This was such an engaging talk. I think a lot of us would probably at least know what an IDOR is and have messed around with it at one time or another. They're one of the first things you kind of learn when you get into web application security. And I love that you made it fun again. And you gave us permission to have fun doing it because, heck, that's probably why half of us got into this business anyway, right? Because it's a lot of fun to do. That said, I'm sure there are many of you out there with questions, or Joshua, about something, methodology, tooling, something that's going to be really cool. I'm going to come out into the audience. Kathy, you're going to help direct me to where the questions are so that we can get those questions asked. We got a gentleman right here, front row center. Let's get that question asked.
Hey, so I saw something similar like in my power company. When I go to log into my bill, there's an account ID as a parameter in the URL up there. You increment it, and it goes to the next person, shows what their bill is, has a little pay now thing. Tried to disclose it to them. They said it's not really an issue because the worst is that somebody could pay somebody else's bill. And I was like, okay, not really a big finding, but I thought I'd try to do responsible disclosure. And then when I was in Vegas at a parking garage, very similar to what you did with the QR code, they're using regular barcodes. Used the barcode reader, and it was just incrementing like a number that just kept going up. So I just changed it to one like 100 later than the car that when I went in, instead of paying for like 9 hours of parking, ended up screwing somebody else over, but paying for like 45 minutes of parking. So I thought that was like really cool. Also, just like a real use case of, you know, if maybe you were parking for a week and went away somewhere, that could be fun to get your car out. Just, you know, like, these are like really cool, like everyday vulns when you're a hacker you come across, but it's also fun when you can put them like the way you did. I thought your talk was great. So thank you.
Thank you. I think those are really interesting examples, and I think it also speaks to how easy it is to become jaded, and easy to, like, I'm sitting on maybe, a couple dozen public vulnerabilities that I've disclosed to companies that I don't talk about because they just don't even respond. You can't even get through to somebody to answer your questions, and yet, in my mind, there's significant vulnerabilities. It's really easy to become jaded. And so I think that you just have what makes like maybe a great future talk coming up. Like, so I think that's, maybe you go through the steps of ethical disclosure, and if, oh, this is not a problem, that's your free pass to then, okay, well then let's talk about this publicly. And then maybe that will change somebody's opinion in the future. Oh, thank you.
So I'm curious, you said go out and have fun with this. When it does look like a ton of fun, I'll give you that. So one thing that inhibits me sometimes is like, how much traffic did you send to these servers and where is it coming from? I know where it's coming from, right? Have you ever had a problem where your traffic caused enough traffic in the server logs that somebody called you and said, hey, Josh, knock it off?
Okay, so the question is, have I ever had a problem where I've generated enough traffic where somebody says, hey, Josh, knock it off? In professional pen tests, yes. And like personal side projects, not so much. So like for the SkyTab Newport Creamery example, I ended up just setting up an AWS instance, and I did do my best to I actually went to the trouble to write an adaptive algorithm to figure out based off time of day what the most likely check numbers would be for the customer. Also because their database is super slow on that backend system. So I recognized when a system is taking 5 seconds to respond, you're like, I don't want to hammer this thing because bad things could happen. But they're using CloudFront on that system as well. But CloudFront is apparently not doing anything for them because I've made millions of requests over the past couple of months and nobody said anything to me about it. So, and how badly am I supposed to feel about this, right? So they use CloudFront, I'm trying to use an adaptive algorithm. To me, I'm like, it's just a public API endpoint in the internet somewhere. If you put API in URL, people are going to hit that, right? So this is just, I think this is just normal kind of access things. Thank you.
So you showed some IDOR examples, including a UUID, which I've had definitely some experiences of trying to convey to a developer, hey, this is still an issue. Do you have any general advice for if you've got a truly random ID that's still susceptible to IDOR, a long hash or UUID?
Yep. So the question is, in one of the examples we talked about, there was an IDOR, but the enumeration part was a UUID value, which is not guessable. You're not going to be able to guess that value. So it's tough telling developers, you need to fix this, because they're like, oh, that's not guessable. My recommendation is to go to the HackerOne Hacktivity site, search for IDOR, and find all of the vulnerability reports that reference a UUID value. Case in point, one that I saw just a couple of weeks ago is in Google Sheets with collaboration features. You can add a collaborator into a sheet, and then it's IDOR vulnerable, but with a UUID. But because of how they enumerate those values, you can get a list of all the other potentially valid IDORs from that as well. So the best way is to say, okay, I understand that you're believing that you're above this vulnerability here, but do you think Google is? Because here's an example where they are also vulnerable. That's something that we could all do better in our reporting, not just saying, here's the vulnerability, but using any of these bug bounty sites or maybe even public breach disclosure to say, here's an example where it happened to somebody else. And now that gives them the insight to say, well, if it happened to them, then it clearly could happen to us as well. Great question, thanks.
Questions. I know you have questions. Hey, here we go.
Did you report these to either of the organizations that you found these things in?
So the question, did I report these vulnerabilities? I did not. I mean, I'll probably get around to it eventually. Like, I don't know. I'm jaded about it. Like, so, like, you know, you look at these URLs, right? And you look at this example here, and you tell me there's not a developer at Cloud Kitchens that does not know that that's an IDOR vulnerability? Like, nobody there knows that that's an IDOR vulnerability? I find that very hard to believe, right? And then it's a question of, well, then how much of my time am I going to spend on that? Am I just going to like reach out to them indefinitely about it? I am a little jaded. I will disclose this to them. I have not done it yet, but you know, also I find it hard to believe that they don't already understand that this is a vulnerability on their system.
Where's it at? Right here.
You might not want to answer it, but just out of your own curiosity, did you ever try the post or put to change the total?
Good question. Did I ever try to post or put to change the total here? I did not try that. That is very interesting. And if it were a pen test, we certainly would, but that seemed like there's a line, and like, you know, I feel like I'm on this side of the line, and that line is not too far away, but like that's on the other side of the line. Yeah, good question.
Just a stupid add-on to that same thing. Did you check to see if the checks were closed, and could you order more food for that person at the table during that time?
So the question is, did I check to see if the checks are closed? When a check is paid, then it returns an empty set. So it doesn't have any more valid data for me anymore. When the check has been closed by the wait staff, but not yet paid, that's the window where you can access that data. And so it's generally like takeout, there's like a 1-minute window, right? But if you're at table service, it's probably like a 30-minute window. So it's somewhere in there. I did not see an endpoint where you could add more data to it, but that would be something interesting to examine about that target organization. I did not run any API enumeration checks. I just used what I observed in the valid requests.